Okay, I think we can get started, and I'm sure there will be some more people who trickle in. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for joining this APDR webinar on new paradigms for resident conference. I know this is a topic a lot of us are very interested in, are actively working on, or actively thinking about. And we have two wonderful panelists today who will be talking to you about some of the things that they've done in their programs. And then we should have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion after their individual sessions. So we have Dr. Kara Gaetke-Udager from Michigan. She's an associate professor of musculoskeletal radiology at the University of Michigan, where she also completed her radiology residency and musculoskeletal and abdominal imaging fellowships. She joined the faculty there in 2015, and soon after, in 2017, became the Diagnostic Radiology Residency Program Director, and has also served as the MSK Division Director since 2021. We also have Dr. Erin Gomez, who's an assistant professor of radiology and director of diagnostic radiology and molecular imaging residency programs at Hopkins in Baltimore. She teaches radiology residents also at a national level as faculty for the AARP and contributes to graduate medical education on the national level as a member of the ACGME Transitional Year Review Committee. In addition to her clinical research, her scholarly work also focuses on innovation in medical student and resident education. So we have two wonderful experts here to talk about this topic. I'm unfortunately on clinical service, so I'll be in and out, but I look forward to catching what I can during that time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Shauna. Hey, everybody. My name's Kara Udager, and we put this topic together today to talk about conferences and specifically how we're all trying to update them and try new things in this day and age. And so I'm going to do a little bit of talking first, and then Erin will be talking as well, and then we'd welcome some interaction from the audience. This is a topic I know we all have thoughts about and maybe strong feelings, and so it'll be great to be able to share some ideas with everybody today. I'm gonna show a few slides as I talk about some of the things we've done in our program at the University of Michigan, and I'll get my slides loaded here, and hopefully everybody can see that. And I have no disclosures. So I'm gonna start by talking a little bit about more about the process. I think about how to make revisions or changes in a conference system. And so I will start by saying just that at Michigan, I was a resident here, as Shauna said, and so I've been here for a while and kind of seen the years go by, and I would say since the time when I started as a resident, we've had a fairly stable conference system. And for us, we do have morning conferences most mornings of the week. Every day at over lunchtime is kind of our main, what we consider, I think, our main conference time. So we have like a traditional noon conference model. And so that's what we've had for many years, ever since I was a resident. Our structure is that those are two 45-minute conferences that happen over lunchtime. So usually noon to 1:30, the residents are off service. At our program, most people are in a central location, all in one hospital. So we have everybody coming to one room. All the levels of residents are there, and it's an in-person experience. So everybody comes to the room. We have a few, less than a handful of residents who are off-site on any given day, and they would be watching on Zoom if their schedule permits. And for the most part, for years and years, both before and after the ABR exam change back in the mid-2010s, these have always had kind of a similar format. So this has been, each conference will have a little bit of didactic component where maybe the faculty are giving an approach to how to look at a certain type of case or a review of certain pathology. And then most of the conference time is done as unknown cases, kind of somewhat of a hot seat format where residents are taking cases and discussing them in front of the group. And it's been that way for a long time. And so that any sort of core review that we ever do, it has that format. The conferences throughout the rest of the year have that format as well. So that's been a really stable thing here. And when you reflect on it, everything is changing around us. So, you know, the world itself is changing. I know lots of people have great ideas about how to do new things, and Erin will tell you about hers. The ABR exams are changing. And so we were asking ourselves recently, is this what we should be doing? This has been the same forever. It's been years and years of how we do our conferences. So for us, this was last year, actually, we undertook a conference redesign project. This was a year-long project, and we wanted this to be resident driven. So it wasn't just us saying, this is how it's going to be, but we wanted their input on what they wanted to happen and what they wanted to see. So essentially our process was to go over the ACGME rules about what were the requirements of a program for conference time, and then let them create around those rules. I made a little diagram here of what happened. And so we tried to make this as engaging as we could for the residents. We, at the beginning of the year, assigned residents, we put them into 3 teams. Those teams had a mix of residents of different levels and personalities. And so the teams were meant to work together to come up with a conference plan or changes to conference. So we had them meet as groups in between our sessions where we were working on this. They were supposed to come up with a written plan of what they wanted conference to look like throughout the year. And we emphasized that it was supposed to be creative. So we said, like, think outside the box, think about crazy things that you think you never could accomplish, and try to get those involved. So we had the teams all work on that. They came back together and presented the ideas to each other. And the idea was that the group was going to vote on what they thought the best plan was going to be. I would say the first round of that, the voting results were not totally clear. So there were some areas of overlap of what they were proposing, and we weren't totally sure whose was better than who else's, and it's sort of like we kind of ended up with a lot of the same. And so we had them meet again, had them do this over. They met back in their teams, they revised their plans, and presented. And we were, again, emphasizing for them to say, the reason my plan is creative is this. This is the innovative thing. This is the new thing. This is the reason why we should try this. We had another meeting. We kind of did another voting session, and then we came up with a plan of a bunch of things that we wanted to try. And we implemented that as a 1-month trial. So for 1 month in the spring of that year, we removed the existing structure completely and put in what they wanted to try. And we tried to include a bunch, like a mix of different things. So it wasn't just one thing the whole month, but it was different things on different days. We were trying to get as much as we could out of that trial month. And then after the trial month, we had them come back, the residents came back together and decided what they wanted to keep. And then we put that into the schedule for the following year. So it was really fun. Actually, the residents got really into this, which was cool to see. And it's really great to hear their ideas. So we thought this worked well as far as the format of how to do that redesign. The thing that came out of it that I thought was interesting was that we ended up with a lot of the old things and a few new things. I was expecting it to be a little more that we'd end up with something looking totally different, and really it didn't all that much. We ended up with a lot of the same sort of format. The residents wanted to emphasize the idea of taking cases, how to take cases, make sure that that was still part of what they were doing. So some of what they emphasized that was new was just that, like, there should be set rules on who's taking a case when, and how does it work to keep the conference going. Instead of having that long, awkward pause where a faculty says, who wants to take this? And nobody says anything. Like, they had rules for how that was going to be dealt with. So a lot of it was like, how to keep this going in the room was kind of a new thing that came out of it. And then we had something we called Radiology Olympics, which was sort of like the Viterini case competition at the AAR meeting. So it's like teams of residents of mixed levels who were taking unknown cases and writing down answers, and then we were scoring who was getting the answers right. So those were pretty fun. They were nice team-based events that everybody liked, and those went on through the year. So the team scores were accumulating throughout the year, which was kind of cool. And then we had, what they also wanted was, our residents will often say they want a chance, they'll see a case on call. It's difficult for them for one reason or another, and they wish they could ask the faculty at the time, like, how would you approach this? Or what should I have thought of? And so we have some sessions every month where the residents bring call cases that they thought were challenging, and we have faculty in the room who are available just for discussion. And so the residents will themselves show a case, and then the faculty in there will say, well, yeah, I would approach it this way, or you might have noticed that thing. And so it's kind of like a live discussion of call cases, kind of like a live feedback session. And those were really popular. So we kept those as well. So we have kind of a similar structure, but with like a mix of new things in it. I'll let Erin talk about what she's doing, which is really creative and great. There, if you look through the literature, there's a lot of different engaging conference formats. So ours is one thing, and that's what we developed, but there's lots of things out there. I listed some of them here. I think some of these team-based approaches are really cool, where residents are working together to answer questions. A lot of benefits to doing that. Some people talked about journal clubs as a nice format for conference. Some places are doing mega conferences, which are all day, hours and hours, which is a really interesting idea. Ours has always been just a little bit each day. And then there's lots more things out there, lots more creative ideas than what we're doing. There's gaming things, there's a lot with audience response, flipped classroom format, there's all kinds out there. So lots of ideas. So what we learned, I think it was interesting how hard it was for us to think outside the box. When we told them, we gave them free reign of what to do, a lot of it kept coming back to what we were currently doing, which might indicate what we're doing is good, maybe, or just that we're not yet getting out there on the on the edges of creativity. The residents really liked being part of the planning. I thought that was a big takeaway for me. And then maybe we don't always have to make a change. Maybe what we're doing is good. And I think in a lot of ways it is. So those are some of the things that came out of our project. Another point I want to raise, which is not necessarily part of that whole discussion, is just that there's another question that comes up for us a lot when we're talking about conferences. And I thought I would throw it into this discussion because I'm sure there are thoughts out there, which is whether or not conference attendance matters. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that for us anyway, we have a certain percentage of conferences that residents have to attend, and that's been a rule for many years. And thinking back to when I was a resident, it seemed like there was always one resident who just wasn't going to conference, and they wouldn't. They would say, this isn't my learning style, and I don't find these very helpful. And instead of going to conference, I go study. Or I go review, the same stuff that you guys are talking about, and that's how I learn. And so I'm not going to go. And what always seemed to be true in the past was that those residents were actually really smart and really good. And so by the time we got to a core review or a board review situation, like you couldn't really tell that resident had never been in a conference. So somehow they were picking up all the same skills and the same knowledge. And once we got to their senior years, like you couldn't really tell the difference. And so we asked this question, partly out of curiosity and partly kind of wondering, like, what should our policy be on conference attendance? What do we do in terms of rules and structure and our expectations, given that the people who aren't going seem to be really good? So we did a study on this. This was a number of years ago now, but I thought it was very interesting seeing the results. And so we looked at a whole bunch of different outcomes, like how did people do on their evaluation, rotation evaluations, how did they do on the ABR exam, all kinds of things. Were they fast readers on call? Did they have discrepancies on call? How had we ranked them in the beginning when they were entering the program, all kinds of things. And essentially, unfortunately, I think we were wanting conference attendance to show that it had some impact, and it didn't. It didn't really make a difference. And so that, I think, emotionally, that was not what we were hoping to see, but kind of interesting. And we talked a lot about this at the time and what it meant and whether the results were actually real. Like, did it mean that our residents they were very good when they were entering the program and they didn't need this, or what exactly should we do about it? And so I'm throwing that out as something for us to think about as we have this discussion too, is sort of like, what impact is this having and how do we prove it? I think the hard part has always been for us to prove things in education. So we have a feeling of what we think happens, but it's harder to actually show anything. So that was kind of interesting. And certainly our residents have brought that up to us over the years that we proved that they didn't have to go. So, for me, I'll hand it over to Erin here in a second. I think what I've kind of learned over the years is just to keep taking a critical eye to what we're doing. Maybe what we're assuming about conference or assuming about attendance isn't really true. Involve the residents in all these processes. I think that makes for a better product. And then just to keep trying. I think for us, we may not have hit yet on the perfect conference plan. And I'm really interested to hear what Erin is doing, what others of you say about what you're doing. I think this is something we can all just constantly work on. So that's all I have for the moment. I'll hand it over to Erin when she is ready, and we'll hear from her.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Okay. How's that? Good to go?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Erin Gomez. I'm the program director for the DR and combined DR Nuke Med residencies at Johns Hopkins. And I'm going to talk about some revisions that we have very recently made to our didactic resident conference curriculum and how that's going. So I will jump right into it. This was our previous morning conference system. Residents showed up in person, and for those who were staffing other sites, like some of our outpatient imaging sites or our community hospital, watched by Zoom. It's 90 minutes split into two 45-minute lectures from 7:30 to 9 every day. And the vast majority of these were didactics with a mix of some case conferences and workshops. This time was protected for the residents, and the attendance requirements were staggered by year in the program, with junior residents being required to attend 90% of the time, third years being required to attend 60% of the time, and fourth years being required to attend 40% of the time. So a few years ago, we conducted a curriculum review of our residency program. This was an intensive process that took about a year, where we led focus groups with the residents, and we met with faculty members and key stakeholders in our curriculum. And we spent a lot of time just sitting and talking and sending surveys to see how we could improve our conference system, because many of the residents had brought ideas or concerns forward saying, most of us don't learn well just sitting in lecture. We want to do something different. And so we did something very similar to what Kara did. It was sort of an iterative process. And the outcome of all of these conversations and surveys was that the residents felt like in didactics, they were not having meaningful interactions with the faculty. And I think those connections, or those missed connections, can propagate throughout the workday. If you have a really engaging and interactive lecture with a faculty member, and then you're on service with them later that day or later that week or month, it can facilitate a little bit more interactivity and a little bit more conversation at the workstation. And so they felt like that was missing. We also are acutely aware of the return of the oral certifying exam in 2028. And we also just saw within many of our residents who were in that sort of sub-generation of post-COVID trainees, the ones who either had their internship and or part of their residency occur during the pandemic, that they had some areas for improvement in terms of interacting with other clinicians and doing things like talking through cases with providers and giving wet reads. And so that was something that we also wanted to address, was how can we get this micro generation that worked from home and really missed out on a lot of human interaction engaged and talking to others the way that we really should as radiologists. As with all academic institutions, we have some members of our department who are legend, but are retiring within the next couple of years. And we wanted to make sure that we also preserved the legacy content that's provided by those faculty members. And then we also wanted to make sure, not everybody, like not all radiologists enjoy and love teaching in the classroom setting. They may be great at the workstation, they may be great at show and tell or tinkering with reports, but there are some folks who just really shine. And so we wanted to highlight the efforts of those really committed and enthusiastic faculty educators as well. So this launched less than 2 months ago, August 1st, we put this into place. It's a very flipped classroom model, but what we did is we generated a list of lecture topics, and we had gone through our previous lecture calendar for the past 3 or 4 years to pull all of the lecture topics that had been presented by faculty. We laid out the APDR core exam outline as well as the ACGME requirements, and we plugged in those lectures into the list. And then we assigned a corresponding faculty subject matter expert. We had those faculty members, based on the lectures that they had given, and which many of them already had slides for, record those lectures. We created a residency course in Canvas, which worked best just based on the resources we have here at Johns Hopkins. And those lectures were uploaded into our Canvas course. We gave faculty members the requirement that they would have to update those lectures every 3 years or sooner if there's a major change in clinical practice or the literature. And then the residents were assigned lectures to view through Panopto, which is a video software that you can embed into Canvas. And within those video lectures, we also added multiple choice quizzes, which were submitted by the faculty members. And those multiple choice quizzes act as a stop in the lecture. So everything pauses, the multiple choice question pops up, and the lecture doesn't resume until an answer is submitted. We don't score those quizzes, they're purely for practice, but they do ensure that they're not just turning on the video lecture and like walking away and letting it play to completion. And then in Canvas, faculty are also able to attach links to their lectures with articles from the literature or supplemental modules, recommended reading, things like that. And so we took our previous schedule and converted 2 days per week to interactive case conferences or hot seat sessions. And then the remaining 3 days a week are for recorded lectures. We also changed our attendance requirements. And so everybody has to watch the videos. The assignments are put out there on a weekly basis, and then we check at the end of each month whether they've completed those weeks of assigned videos, and I'll show how we track attendance in a moment. And so every case conference that we have on Tuesday, Thursdays is aligned with the assigned video content the day before. And we have 100% attendance requirement on those in-person days, which kind of translates to that 40% fourth year requirement that we had previously, as long as the residents were eligible to attend conference. So they're not on nights, they're not on vacation, they're not in a rotation that would prohibit them from either logging onto Zoom or coming to the hospital. So this is what the revised schedule looks like for us. Again, we have recorded lectures or R1 specific curriculum, like PBLs, 3 days per week. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have in-person case conferences that are led by our faculty based on their assigned video lectures. And again, the Zoom link works for those who are offsite, so they can still get credit for participating in those case conferences. And this conference time is still protected Monday through Friday. And so this time to watch the lectures from 7:30 to 9 still exists for our residents. And we've told them, you don't have to watch from 7:30 to 9. You could watch from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. if that's when it's easiest for you. If you want to watch after your kids go to bed, if you want to knock them all out on a Sunday, it doesn't matter as long as you get it done. And at that time, it's protected for you, but that time is your own. So how do you track video lecture attendance? For us, Panopto is free to all School of Medicine faculty who are associated with a Canvas course. So every faculty member who will be recording lectures or giving case conferences, we've added as teaching assistants in the course, and so they get free access to this resource. We also have a resource here called the Office of Online Education, and there are folks there who are Panopto and Canvas experts. For more senior faculty who don't feel comfortable recording their lectures, They have a learning studio where the faculty can go in and just present the talk to a member of the Office of Online Education, and they record that and upload and get everything set up for them. But in terms of tracking the attendance, there are analytics for each video. And so if I drill down and click on each of these videos, this is a screenshot from one of the other School of Medicine courses, but it will show you each learner who has watched the video, how much of the video they completed. So skipping around through the video and only watching portions of it results in less than 100% completion at the end. And then it also shows who completed the embedded quiz content. So here are some of the benefits that we anticipated, but also some that we've observed already after putting this system in place. So one thing that I felt really strongly about when we restructured this system was the R4 resident as a role model, like preserving the role modeling role of a senior resident and allowing them to be there consistently to show the juniors how to take cases and give them something aspirational. And so we have seen, of course, higher attendance at these in-person sessions, but we've seen just a broader variety of first through fourth years showing up. And because they are now seeing the seniors, we have noticed within the last couple of weeks that the juniors are a lot more comfortable taking cases, probably because they've seen examples of how to take cases from their peers, but also they have that foundational video content ahead of time. The in-person content that we are providing is now really high yield, and it's focused on things they need to know for the core exam, but also clinical practice skills. So some of these in-person sessions are workshops held with like a WebPAX and in Paxbin. Some of them are hands-on workshops related to MSK ultrasound, or things like that. So things that they need to know both for the test, but also for their life. We have provided an asynchronous learning opportunity, which is definitely a generational preference with this group of learners. And then the faculty who are senior in our department, who are retiring soon, or who may no longer be at Hopkins in the next couple of years, they felt really strongly about submitting these recordings, actually. And it's been really beautiful to see the ability to preserve their legacy content and have some enduring assets related to their work. The faculty, I think, after the library is established, will probably feel that this is a lighter lift, because pulling 10 accession numbers to come and show cases in the PACS, or sending 8 to 10 cases to Paxbin to workshop with the residents is a much lighter load than creating and giving a 45-minute didactic. And then we've given a little bit more schedule flexibility to tailor content for the year of training. So we've been able to pull our R1s out a little bit more on recording days and do some focused PPLs with them. I do have a couple frequently asked questions that came from our faculty, and maybe I'll just go through those quickly, and then if there are other things in the Q&A, we can address those as well. So one big concern that the faculty brought forward is, okay, it's 3 years later. This is if I already have a recording of my talk, let's say I gave the talk at a society meeting and I already have this lecture recorded, do I need to re-record? No, Panopto is a system that as long as you have an MP4 formatted recording, you can upload that and it functions the same as if you had recorded it independently. I already talked about some of the on-campus resources that we have for our faculty who are uncomfortable using this software for the first time. A lot of faculty ask, how can you ensure that they won't just watch the video without paying attention? And of course we can't entirely, but by embedding quizzes randomly, looking at the analytics, setting expectations, and requiring that 100% completion, we can increase the chances that they're meaningfully participating. Faculty also asked, in 3 years, when it's time for me to update my lectures, do I have to re-record? And the answer is no. So either if you have narrated slides in PowerPoint, or within Panopto, you can trim out the portions of your lecture that are no longer relevant and either re-record or add slides that include the updated content. So it's not an overhaul when it's time to update. Folks also ask me, is this still compliant with the ACGME requirements? And the answer is yes. So the ACGME requires that residents have at least 5 hours per week of protected time for teaching. And this can include didactics, asynchronous learning, and in-person conferences. And we had these changes approved by our GME office as well as our department leadership. Because everything is housed in Canvas, there's a single sign-on through Hopkins, and so that material is secure. Some of the quizzes we have embedded are also lecture evaluations, so our faculty continue to receive evaluations on their recording. So that's a summary of what we have done in the last few months, and I'm happy to take any questions related to this or others in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. That was really interesting. What was the length of the process to get all the videos and make all the changes you needed to be ready?
It's it is ongoing, I will say. We decided to try this in February of this year. And so it was a pretty quick race to launch everything in August. The first month of our curriculum is always R1 specific. So we had that buffer between July and August to focus on the R1s and do what we always do for them. But we set a deadline of 2 weeks prior to the case conference for faculty to submit the recorded lectures. And that's been working so far. I also have a resident whose role is conference liaison. And so they help me with scheduling and communicating with faculty and managing some of the recordings online.
Awesome. Well, we can have, if anyone has, okay, I was going to say, I don't see any questions yet, but here we go. So I'll read the question from the chat first. So this just says, do residents attend multidisciplinary conferences and tumor boards? If yes, do those count towards the ACGME requirements? And if yes, what is the feedback from the residents? I can answer really quickly for our program. A lot of our multidisciplinary conference tumor boards are covered by fellows. And so resident participation is a little more spotty. Often it's out of interest of the resident on service, or in some cases, the R4s who are doing more of a concentration in that year are going to the focused ones for that area. We don't necessarily, if you mean ACGME requirements for tumor boards or conference, we don't include it as conference time typically. But the residents who do those think they're excellent. They are really excellent learning opportunities. Our residents who have done those have really gotten a lot out of it.
Yeah, it's the same for us. We don't include it toward the morning conference, the 5 hours requirement, but they're certainly allowed to participate and attend any of the tumor boards they'd like. And then we have an elective in the 4th year that's like a month of just tumor boards, because we have, I think, 35 different multidisciplinary conferences that happen across our department on a monthly basis. And so they're able to attend a bunch of those.
All right, there was one question in the Q&A section, which was, can faculty opt out? And Erin, I'll let you answer that one first.
Sure. So we have faculty within different tracks within our department. There are folks in the academic track, and then we have folks who are clinical associates and they only read cases. And so clinical associates are welcome to opt out of the teaching because it's not a requirement for them. All of our faculty are strongly encouraged to teach the residents, although we have had some folks opt out. And for me, that's okay, right? Because if they don't want to be there, and it's probably going to translate into the interaction with the residents. And so we have so many other faculty who have been able to provide really high quality lectures that it's sort of been a non-issue. But yeah, they don't have to. I will also say though, having a lecture in the library counts as having given that lecture it from our department's standpoint. Like, so if it's assigned every year, they get credit for giving that lecture on an annual basis, in addition to the accompanying case conference.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. We so for ours it's a little different structure, but we typically have like there's across the year there's a mix of divisions who are giving conferences for their curriculum, and so we have the divisions figuring out what works for them and how they're going to structure their own group. And so in some divisions we have everybody's participating, and here and there are faculty who aren't doing it, but kind of for us it's kind of similar. It's like we have really great participation across the board, enough to the point where, like, you know, if somebody is really not wanting to do something that year, we have lots of lecturers. So cool. We have another question in the chat from Scott Simpson. So it says, great talk, Aaron. We've chatted before. They're trialing something similar at Penn. 1 day a week asynchronous, but the videos residents watch are all different that day based on resident year and rotation. Each subspecialty will have a longitudinal video curriculum. Okay, cool. So sounds like Penn sounds like they're going to a kind of a similar model with different levels of videos. Cool.
I think this is such a great idea, Scott, and it's something that we've kind of noodled around with too, in terms of curating an R1 specific curriculum. So once we have a really robust video library, which I anticipate will happen over the next year or so, I think then we'll be able to create submodules within our Canvas course that says, like, so it's your first month on neuro, or it's your first month on MSK, to allow them to kind of march through things in a more sort of graded difficulty approach.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me that everybody is doing this kind of in parallel at their own places. And there's so much great content out there. You know, it's every place kind of has their own version of it. And it on a national level, like a shared resource would be really cool. You know, it would have kind of stuff from everybody and everywhere. So it's interesting how it's all kind of happening at the same time at a bunch of different places. There was, so we had some discussion questions that we had written down as well. And we can maybe chat about some of those. We've talked somewhat about this, but I guess a question for both of us, Aaron, would be like, we've tried things, we have a certain conference structure. How do we know if it's working? Like, what are we looking at? Who are we asking that question to? What do you guys do for that? Like, how do you figure out if you think what you have is a good thing?
So we have monthly check-in meetings with the residents. We all get together and have lunch once a month, and we open the floor kind of for discussion. But because this has been such an integral part of what we've focused on for the past couple of years, we've talked about it multiple times at our PD check-in meetings. And so kind of taking the pulse in the group setting, and then we've also sent out surveys to the residents asking them, like, is this working? Do you prefer the new format? Because we told them, if this is not working, we can abandon ship and just go back to the way we were doing things before. But I think there has been definitely a preference for the new system. And then the faculty also seem really happy with it. In my interactions with them, I think they've really enjoyed spending more time just going through cases with the residents and working with learners who are showing up with foundational knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do it? I mean, I know you did this process where you revised things with them, but before that, how were you checking in?
You know, it sounds similar. We have similar resident meetings on a monthly basis. I think that's where we do a lot of the discussion of what they're liking, what they're not liking. I would say a lot of this too is sort of word of mouth, where, you know, you'll hear what conferences are working great. Everybody's very engaged in them. Which ones maybe less so. You know, I think for us, certainly, you know, you guys seem like you have a a good attendance system for us. We have a little bit of like waxing and waning attendance based on time of year, you know, a little bit of sort of up and down with that. And so it's interesting. We have an ongoing discussion of like, you know, how to keep people engaged, how to, you know, how to structure the conferences so that we get everybody showing up all the time. So, you know, for us, it hasn't been a super formal feedback process on conferences until we did this process where we were talking about it a lot for a year. So it's, I think that's part of it. And then I guess the bigger question too is like, is it affecting anything in how they're doing professionally? You know, are scores on any sort of exams changing? How do we quantify skills in taking cases? I mean, there's eventually going to be an oral exam that needs to be passed, but is there a better way of providing feedback on how they're doing with that? And is that being affected by conference structure or content? I think those things are so hard to prove in education. It always seems like we don't have quite the measurement tools we want, or we have low numbers of subjects. We only have certain numbers of residents per year. So that can be a little hard to study, I think, too. All right. So here, I think this is another one that I'm interested in is just the change management part of this. So it sounds like you had a lot of faculty who were really engaged with making videos and wanting to preserve some of their knowledge or the way that they describe how they teach residents about these topics. I guess a question for others perhaps is like, how do you incentivize faculty to engage with something new, or to, you know, to make a change? You're saying we're making this change, you know, how do you get faculty buy-in on these things, especially if it's something different? We were doing it like this for a long time. Now we want to try something else. How do we get faculty on board with that? No, for us, you know, I think we have faculty who are really enthusiastic about teaching residents and helping them become radiologists and helping them gain skills. And I think when we tie those things back to that, there does seem to be a pretty high level of interest in helping. And change is hard for everybody, I think, but you know, people seem to be engaged when we can tie back to that question of why are we doing this, and what's the goal. And, you know, it seems like we are lucky to have a lot of people who are interested in that. But it's a challenge, certainly, and especially with, I know everybody's busy across the country clinically, and I think that comes into play too, with what our level of engagement or time is. So
Yeah, I think for our faculty, we also told them, like, record this for me one time and then it will be a lighter lift for you, right? Because we had faculty who were requesting a certain number of academic days to come in and make sure they were giving conference just for the morning. And so I think by plugging them into the library system and then allowing them to come less frequently for case conferences, we were able to give them back at least a little bit of that time. For our faculty, some of our bonuses are also tied to education and quality of education. So the faculty evaluations get submitted to our division directors, and we get scores based on how our lectures and how our interactions with the residents are rated. And so some of that is part of it too, I think, you know, to motivate faculty to stay engaged and continue teaching despite busy clinical services.
mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It looks like there's another chat question. How do you evaluate, I think it's probably, how do you get resident evaluations of faculty for each lecture? Kara, do you want to start with how you do it with your system?
Sure. Yeah, we have, so for each lecture, the residents do get a link in their email to send an evaluation of the lecture. So that's for us, for noon conferences, it's a couple per day when they're going on. And so I would say there's not 100% participation in sending those back, but usually there are evaluations coming in for each one. You know, the lectures are it's generally positive feedback. I will say it is helpful to have anonymous comments of when there can be improvements made on those lectures, and that then is taken back to the division and or the faculty to say, like, this was maybe a topic that residents didn't understand, or this was a topic that maybe they thought was not as helpful, or if it's a formatting thing, it might be individualized, or it might be as a group, like, hey, it's the residents are thinking that it would be more helpful to approach it this way. And some of that it may be individual feedback, or it may be something we talk about even at a faculty meeting if it's more widespread. For most of the lectures, the residents are trying to give feedback on something larger. We'll talk about it as a group. So we do have that. And I will, like I said before, I think some of it's word of mouth too. Like, it'll come up in conversation, and a lot of it, whenever the residents go to noon conference and come back, I'll always ask them, like, what was the noon conference and what did you learn about and how was it? And I will say I get a lot of valuable stuff just by chatting with them as they're coming back from it. So some of that is helpful too, just hearing as they're walking out, what are their actual feelings about what they just saw. So that can be a nice thing if you're always asking them to talk about it afterwards. What about you guys?
Yeah, so for the videos, for the video assignments, one of those non-negotiable quiz questions that's embedded in the lecture comes within the last 30 seconds, and it's an evaluation of the lecture, and we have a little bit of embedded code that exports it into like a graph for the faculty members so they can see their ratings from all of the residents who've completed the quizzes. For the in-person sessions, for those who are attending on Zoom, there's a bot that goes in and drops a link to the evaluation in the chat, and then it's the same, they get an email with a link to evaluate if they attended in person. And I will say those are much more hit or miss in terms of completion. We have to remind them all the time, like, faculty are coming to give lectures to you. You need to tell them how they're doing, because we can't change anything. We can't change the schedule if you don't let us know how it's going. But it sounds like we have a pretty similar system. Can I ask, when you did your sort of longitudinal process, was it every resident in the program who was involved in the revision, or only those who were interested? And do you feel like it was seniors who were more engaged in that process? What did that look like for you all?
It was everybody. So it was not optional. They were all put in the groups, and the cool part was it seemed like everybody was interested. And I think for the more junior residents, they were feeling like, this is going to affect me more if we're making changes. And the senior residents were feeling like, I want to leave a mark in this way, or I have the expertise. I've been through more conferences than the juniors, so I know how it is, or I know how it should be. I think they were, so it was kind of those two dynamics working together, which was cool. I would say it was interesting when we were setting up the trial in the spring, where we had decided what we wanted to try. It was quite a project to put all of that together and try to explain to each faculty who was participating what we wanted them to do, because everything was kind of new. So it was going from, like I said, years and years of always doing it the same way to, like, well, on this day, we actually want you to try this completely new thing. And so there was a lot of coaching with setting all of that up. But everybody was pretty excited, and that was the cool part about it too, was it increased the engagement with what we were doing in general. It felt like it broke us out of our routine a bit. So yeah, we had good resident participation, and really I think it was it was nice because, I mean, conferences is a big topic, but you could use that kind of structure for any sort of change you're trying to make or revision you're trying to do to one of your systems in your program. So it was cool in that way. They worked together well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think they probably, I mean, I can guess that they probably bonded a lot over that experience, and they probably feel invested in the new system because they helped make it.
Yeah.
I will say, like,
Definitely.
for us, our committee was comprised of my squeaky wheels. So I had residents who brought a lot of either frank complaints or ideas for how to change conference. And I said, you know what, if like, sure, I'm going to put you in charge of this committee, and let's work through this together. And it was a lot of meetings, but they rose to the occasion. It was nice to see them transition from squeaky wheels to perhaps like wheels moving things forward. And
Yeah.
it was nice.
That's very cool. Yeah, it's a good leadership opportunity for the residents. That's great. Any other questions from the group are welcome. We talked about, I guess, Erin and I can briefly mention, we talked about this a little before the session started, but we were talking about attendance and how we approach that. And I think that may be something that is an issue across programs. But I know I was saying, I'll briefly describe kind of what we do. And I think it's hard for me, especially I talked about the study we did where we talked about conference attendance and whether it matters. But I think we've tried to find the balance between knowing that we have adult learners and that they have their people and they have a good usually self-awareness and knowledge of their learning style. And then we also want them to be in conference because we're giving it, we're putting work into it, we're getting them off service to do it. So we've always been working on what the right balance is for taking attendance, and then either giving an incentive or taking away something depending on how attendance is going and what our expectations are. So that's something that's kind of evolved for us over the years. But for us, for a long time, I would say we didn't have a specific thing we gave or took away based on attendance. It was just, this is what the attendance expectation was. And we need you to be there most of the time. Basically, we would always say 75% of the time. And understanding that sometimes people had other things that they had to do or that would come up. And then we wanted them to be there most of the time in the room engaging. I think like I said before, I think that most people would do that, and we have a great group in conference. And then there was always kind of the challenge of like, what about the person who doesn't go, and how is that perceived by the rest of the group? So that's always been something we've struggled with a bit more. So I fully respect Erin, your system of a lot of accountability for being in conference since it's time away from service.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier. For our residents, it's less negotiable. But so their conference participation is tied to their ability to participate in our moonlighting pool. And so the first month that they don't meet the attendance requirement is a warning. And then the second month at any point throughout the year results in suspension from the moonlighting pool. If they're not participants in the moonlighting pool, which sometimes happens with our military residents or residents who are on certain visas, they are required to take extra plain film call in the emergency department. I've only had to suspend one person for 1 month over the past 4 years. So it has worked pretty well. I know it probably is like a more harsh system, but we had found in the past that when we didn't have some kind of consequence for not coming, that the attendance was abysmal, like 30 or 40% of the time. And that's really hard to justify to the faculty to say, like, come give this talk to 5 or 6 people. It's defeating for them too. So I think it's now that the expectation is established, they understand it, and that requirement, is the same for both the video and the in-person components.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
All right, we've got about 5 minutes here until the end point. We would be glad to answer any more questions. If any come up.
Were there particular elements from your new system that the residents felt really strongly about keeping for future years?
For us.
Yeah, I can imagine the Olympics were super popular. I want to try
Those
that
were popular.
program.
Yeah, those are fun. It's a nice team bonding kind of thing, and mixes up the, the format a bit here and there, which is nice. The residents like having that chance here and there to show cases from call. I think that makes them feel like they're getting real feedback and discussion, and frankly, like peer support, where it's sort of like, this was a hard case and I want to show you that I struggled, or I want to teach you what I learned from this case. That's kind of a nice thing. So they all really liked that. I think there is mostly desire to have a group that's well functioning in terms of taking cases and feeling like they're not afraid to take cases. And I think that their attempts to try to make that like part of a real process and a format, I think they have kept that since we've switched over. So it's been, like I said, faculty are hesitant to call on people sometimes, and residents are sometimes hesitant to volunteer. And I think we kind of figured out how to do that in a way with having, a certain way of going around the room and a certain way of including people that makes it just feel like this is not, this is just how we do it. It's not supposed to be a pressurized situation. And I think that has been something that's carried through, is just a normalization of doing that. And for me, I was in the last class that did the oral board, the old oral board or oral exam at the end of residency. And so for me as a resident, all the conferences were hot seat style, and you did that because that's what was coming at the end. You needed to be prepared. And I think I noticed right after that went away that it seemed like there was less desire or maybe pressure to jump in on that and be really good at it. And I think that our process kind of helped people get some of that back into the system, it hopefully permanently. And because some groups now are headed towards the new oral certifying exam. So I think there's some good things that carried out of it now.
Would you be able to share a little bit more about the etiquette that they established for each other and the system for keeping the cases moving? Because I've also seen that, right? It's, even with medical students, they'll say, I feel uncomfortable being called on. And for a radiology resident, I think it's difficult for me. I struggle with that a little bit, because it's like, well, a surgeon is going to call on you if they come into the room and ask you to look at their case, and you have to take that case and show it to them. So I'm very curious to see sort of what they set up amongst themselves.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that works the best was when we are doing core review, official core review with the R3 class, their system is they go in alphabetical order just around one at a time. And that works well because everybody knows who's coming next, and everybody, it's just yours. It's your case, and you have no say in what it is or isn't. And so what we just decided we would go around the room, and then it would alternate between starting from the front or starting from the back. So, and the chiefs would be in the room and kind of help this go. And so it would be, I think it takes the pressure off of someone who's volunteering for a case, because no one would want to step up. Or if you kind of did, but you didn't know what the case was, it would feel like, well, do I sound even worse if I volunteer, but then don't know it? And so instead it was like, well, this one is just mine. It's just my turn. And whatever it is, I'm going to take a shot at it. And then there was a kind of an agreement that, like, let's say that the R1 happens to get the most difficult case, that there would be like a kind of like a phone a friend, or they would get a helper if it was really, out of range for someone. But we just went with that, like you go down the line. And so that way the faculty presenter doesn't have to feel like they're calling on someone or identify who's out there. So it was sort of like everybody, it's hands off. It's just luck. You just get what you get. It goes around, everybody takes a turn. And that seemed to work the best because it was clear what was happening next. And I like to call on people, but I think most faculty don't. And I understand, you know, it can feel like it's not very nice, or you might not be able to see in the back of the room who's who or whatnot. So I think that going around has worked well.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
yeah. All right, well, it's 1 o'clock. I will thank everybody for coming. This was a great opportunity to talk about conferences. And Erin, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I will, yep, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I'd be willing to chat with anybody offline about conferences anytime. And we will look forward to the next APDR roundtable. All right, take care, everybody.